wonders what to talk to you about, really, because, as I said just now, there are so many, many aspects of this wonderful truth. And yet there is always a foundation. And that foundation, if we repeat it over and over again, we can never establish it firmly enough. And I think why the world seems to be in such a wobbly state of being is because the foundation was never really laid correctly by every individual. Even here, perhaps, we have discovered that some of our days, or some of the hours of our days, are not particularly grounded firmly on that foundation. So I think that the only thing we all have to strive to do is to live firmly upon that foundation. Well, many years ago, when I was quite a little girl, I used to wonder why Christians didn't seem any different to anybody else. I used to wonder why they all lost their temper, and of course I did too. Why they lost their temper and got jealous and resentful and used all the different methods that the world uses to put things right. Why were they so little different, the people all around us who did not go to church or even want to be Christians? And this used to puzzle me. I was puzzled about myself, puzzled about my very, very precious parents, who were both very spiritual, very lovely, but nevertheless, they did all the same little things that I saw other people do. And possibly this was a challenge to me. Possibly it was, because I sought to find out what you could do to retain that balance of reaction to everything that Jesus said we could have. Because when I was a child, I had all the teaching of the Bible given to me. In fact, it became very irksome to read a chapter every night out of a book that I could not understand. And I can remember on one occasion, to show you what a rebel I was, I just picked up that Bible and I threw it down and I said to Mother, I'm not going to read it anymore because I don't understand a word in it. And I'm just not going to read it. So she picked it up and she said, yes, you will read it. And she said, just as you had to learn your ABC and then put those letters together to make words and then the words into sentences, and you just had to learn that ABC, so must you learn what is in the Bible. And she said, later on in life you will be glad that your brain and mind have stored up all that you've read, and you will then perhaps begin to understand the meaning of it. Well, you know, it's all right to talk to your children like that. You have too, I suppose. I still thought it was a lot of rot. I couldn't tell her so, because when I was a child that would never do. But you think it all the same. However, I read it, and I had, strangely enough, for things like that, I had quite a good memory. So God knew that too. And He was storing in my mind His word, even though I knew nothing about it, or at least not much about the meaning of it. Then I remember at Sunday school I took the first prize for being able to recite the Sermon on the Mount, 111 verses without a mistake. The prize was a Bible, much to my horror. Another Bible. Bible. That's all I ever seem to hear of or get. However, I remember thinking this. It is funny, I know that Sermon on the Mount right off by heart, but I don't know one word of what it means. And I am going to say that I find lots of people today who don't know what it means. And the reason that they do not know what it means is because they don't do it. You know, it's a very funny thing that as soon as you do something, you have proved that it is so. But just reading it and hearing it and receiving it as information only, we're apt to think, yes, it sounds pretty good, but who could do it? Who could do it? Now, if we thought like that over everything in life, we wouldn't have got anywhere, would we? We shouldn't have reached any goal at all. We shouldn't have achieved anything at all. And how willing we are to study and strive to reach some sort of goal, And, we urge our children to study and to just concentrate and keep going until they get to the top. Now, all these things that we urge our children to do, and, of course, things that we were urged to do, too, it is strange, isn't it, that we go with all our strength, or we put all our strength into it until we do, if we are able to, we reach that goal and achieve. Yet all these things, the careers, everything that we study, everything we're striving to become, all of that shall pass. Every bit of that shall pass. Whether we become brilliant mathematicians or whether we become eloquent speakers or whatever we should become, all that passes. In every one of the things, there isn't anything you can name that will not pass. But if in all those things that we do, we bring the quality of the foundation, which is this Sermon on the Mount, then all those works live on. And they live on not to destroy or to cause destruction, but they live on to cause the building up of the kingdom of God. So therefore some of the finest professions and careers in this world have almost been dead from the start because they were not founded on the rock of Christ. And yet they have achieved, they have attained. But when they do achieve, you will see that it is turned into a materialistic end, or it is used for destructive purposes. Science is one of the most marvelous things in the world if it would be filled with the Sermon on the Mount. If it would be filled, or shall we say built upon, the rock, which is Christ. Science is proving to the world today almost equally, in some cases more than religions have offered, because they are giving you the whys and the hows. Whereas as a child, and often now, I listen to a sermon on the radio, and it's a glorious sermon, but not once did that minister tell the people how to do it. They will say, this is the way to do it, do this, and you should do that, but how? And the questions that are always coming up in the minds of individuals that have not yet grasped this marvelous foundation. How can I do it? Even men, middle-aged and elderly men will say to me, how can I apply that in my business life? How? Everybody wants to know how. First of all, they say, why doesn't it work? Why isn't this working in my life? Why? And I say, you didn't apply the principles. All right, how do I apply the principles? That is inevitably what happens when they've said why, then they say how. So until we're able to say how, and we never can until we do it, can you show the way to a place if you have never been? Can you? And yet if you can show the way, how readily and willing you say, oh yes, I know that feeling being lost on the road. I've traveled that way, this is the way to go. With joy you show the way. And so until we know the way, how shall we ever show the way? And that is why parents very often say to me, I don't know how to answer my child. It's one of the saddest things to have to say. I don't know how to answer my child. To whom shall that child turn but you? Then you have to take those children later on to people whom you think know. And you know that that is a dreadful defeatist attitude. It is a dreadful thing for parents to take their children to somebody else for advice. It really is. And then you see, chiefly it is because too late has the parent left this thing to happen. Too late have they sought the foundation of life. Too late have they seemed to ask how. But nothing is ever too late if, at that precise moment, when the child asks you a question you cannot answer, if you would say, isn't that sad, Mummy or Daddy should know the answer, and I don't. Supposing we're both together, try to find out the answer, because I ought to learn it. I ought to know. Will that be too much of a humiliation before your child? Oh no, that child will respect you forever. But when you say, oh, don't ask so many questions, I'm busy. Oh, one day you'll know the answer. Oh, someday you'll get a book that will tell you what it is. And then that incessant thought within the child, why doesn't my mother know? How is it she doesn't know the answers to these things? And this is the tragedy of this whole experience in the world today of chaos. Because questions that have been asked have never been truthfully answered. So what is the answer then? How shall we start now to have the answer? Only by laying that firm foundation now. Now. When I was in South Africa, the work that I have done for nearly 20 years, I've lived in South Africa for 30 years, but the work that I did it had a peculiar nature, I would say, because I was never attached to anything. I had never ever worked for or in any organization. I have simply carried out this dream I had as a child. Somewhere there must be a solution to this problem, that Christians are not different to those people in the world. We should be so different that we should daily shock the world with what we do. We should shock the world, just as the world so often shocks us. But we don't. We don't give the world any shocks. We don't seem to be any different, and yet when one or two of us do change and we become utterly grounded or founded upon that foundation, then we're called crazy, odd, abnormal, not quite sane. But just imagine they said that of Jesus. You're crazy, they said to him once or twice. But when he said it must be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, he was really meting out justice, preparing gradually the consciousness of man for that time when love itself should be revealed. He was preparing the way by law into love. And so you see, until you and I find this foundation of love, we still come under the law. We still come under the law, and so we act just like the days of the law. Thou shalt not all. And that age should have been past. And 2,000 years nearly have gone, and we are still floundering in the law. And Christians who are half believing in the law of love and half in the law of Moses are causing conflict. That is the conflict in the world. There should be no conflict in the world today because we should have gone beyond law. We've got such a mixture in the world today. We've got crowds of people living just as they think they will, and they don't care about the law. That's before the law. We've got crowds of people living according to the law, thou shalt not all. I will do this to you. And if you do that to me, I'll do that to you. Way back in the age of law. And there are a few that have found the law of love. And those who have found the law of love have to become the leaven, which will leaven that whole lump. Therefore, how many of us, and I presume all of us here would say we were Christians, how many of us are leavening the lump in our own little lives, in our own homes? Are we leavened? Are we really leavening the lump? Are we that hidden treasure that Jesus said the kingdom of heaven was? Are we expressing the qualities of a child of God or a child of this law? Not yet knowing God as Father, not yet knowing God as love. Why, it's so sad to me. I was asked in a church way down, quite a long way from Minneapolis, said, you never seem to teach everlasting punishment and eternal damnation. Why, I felt as if a sword went through me. And I said, well, I suppose there are lots of people who could come and tell you all about that. There must be lots of people who could. Because they still live in this, I will give you back what you do to me. So their God to them is a God of paying back what you've done to me. And yet, Jesus came and revealed what God was. Jesus came and said, your Father is love. Say, our Father. call him Father, not this great war God, this terrifying Jehovah that you're terrified to approach, so you speak to the prophets. That was the lowest, or at least it was then the highest conception that they had of God. And now we should have the highest conception of God, which is love. If God is love, can it be other than is? He is. You can't make something not if it is. 2 and 2 make 4, and nothing you could do could make it 5. Anything that is. And it is eternal. So therefore God is love. What else could he be then? Therefore, doesn't it change your whole outlook and your whole idea of God? Doesn't it make you see that you needn't fear him in the sense of being afraid? Because the word fear God with all your heart means to reverence him, not to be loosely acquainted with him, but to revere his name, to hallow his name, to, the Aramaic shows you that it isn't fear as being afraid of, but reverence, having awe, having respect. It's the most amazing difference. Now, if God has become to us a God of love, then we shall treat those around us with love. We shall not use the law to train our children. We shall not use the law to treat our husbands. And if there were so many, and there's only one, I mustn't attack him, must I? But if there were men here, it would be the same. Men and women, if they would know God as love, how different would their marriages be? How different would their parenthood be? But you see, they love to get hold of the law. Spare the rod and spoil the child. I don't think Jesus said that. Don't you see we don't live in that? With Moses we came under the law, with Jesus grace and truth. Oh, how soft, how gentle, grace and truth. You know, this word grace is so often misunderstood. People think that that is just something that's intangible, you can't explain. But grace. You can have all the gifts in the world. You can speak with tongues, you can heal, you can prophesy, you can have all the gifts of the Spirit. But if you haven't got the graces of God, such as humility, patience, meekness, lowliness, love, if you haven't got those, then all those gifts are of no value. Nor are those gifts done to the glory of God. So with your passing, your works die. But if the graces have been attached to the gifts, then those gifts live on forever, and the memory of your work lives on forever. So what is the foundation? I started these classes in South Africa with this vision in mind, that if I could get families, children and mothers and fathers living the Sermon on the Mount, and they would go into their churches, no matter what church it was, what does it matter? Jesus was not a Presbyterian, neither was he a Lutheran. So what does it really matter what church you worship God in? It makes no difference. Because if you don't worship him here, you don't worship him anywhere. You can sit in church and love Mrs. So-and-so's hat for the whole hour, and you have not worshipped. That would be a temptation of mine, because hats are a vice with me. I love hats. But at the same time, you can see that worship, if it isn't from here, is not worship. I can remember as a young girl, I couldn't bear church either, not when I was very young. So I used to think of a lovely subject that would make me happy, and settle down to the long sermon thinking about the thing I wanted to think. A lot of fun, mischief too, very often. But my father thought that I was a little angel. She wasn't. I was just working up all kinds of nice things to do, but using the long sermon, because I couldn't bear the sermon, using the long sermon to think it out. So I wasn't worshipping at all, not at all. The worship is here. Oh, and you sing a hymn, but it needn't necessarily be worship. So everything must come from the heart. So I hoped that I could train these people somehow to live the Sermon on the Mount, and go back into their churches, no matter what kind of church it was, and live the Sermon on the Mount and enrich their church. And then I had this vision. You know, I expect all of you had things like this when you were young, but this stuck to me all through my life. And I was not perfect by any means, but I held on to this vision that one day all the churches in the world would be one. And I could see that if everybody in every church lived the Sermon on the Mount, then instead of discussing their labels and isms or the methods of baptism or the different ways of partaking of the Holy Sacrament and making those rather, or stressing them as vitally important things, they would be so lost in the living of the Sermon on the Mount that somehow they wouldn't know what to call themselves. I had this picture always in my mind. It shall be, it must be one day. But of course the world was an enormous world for me. And I used to think, oh God, how can I help? How shall I help to do this thing? In what way? And of course the challenge was, live it yourself. Live it yourself. So there came a time when I took that Sermon on the Mount literally and lived it. Oh, have you ever tried to? You get every opportunity under the sun to have to do it. As soon as you say, I will live this verse, I will live this, you have to be given such an experience to be able to do it. So you called forth all the tests and challenges. Like you said, or your son might say, I want to be a mathematician, or I want to be a doctor, whatever it is. He's just got to go all out and study the theory and the practical side of it before he can say he's a doctor or before he can be a mathematician. So in this you have to do it and work hard at it. Now the minute you do, just like these young people get the tests to see what grade they've made, so do we get the tests in the spiritual life to see what grade we have made. And the marvelous part is that this career is eternal. This career is eternal, not only for us as an individual, but for all the generation coming after us. We leave behind this glorious legacy. We leave for our children this marvelous legacy that we ourselves have accumulated, the treasures of the kingdom. We not only take them with us, but we leave them behind. It is a sort of inexhaustible something, so intangible yet so real, that I consider the spiritual life is the best life to tackle, the best career to get at, to put all my deepest and highest energies into it, all my earnestness, all my love, all my willpower, put it into that. Then you will find, as I did, although it was so hard, I was called crazy, fanatical in a modern world to attempt to do things like that. To walk out of what seemed to be such a comfortable security into what looked so insecure, that I might prove to the people I would teach that it worked. And when they would say, how do you know? Because I'm doing it. And if I can do it, you can do it. Well, this was the challenge. Now I was still more or less learning to do it perfectly, permanently, so that people, without me doing anything about it, seemed to come and ask me how I could react like that with such a thing happening to me. Oh, I say, you know, that's easy. I'll tell you why. Then you see, I would begin to explain to them how, with my new understanding, I saw it was plain common sense. Truly, that Sermon on the Mount is plain common sense. It is really. And I've proved it so many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times from beginning to end. And so these children, I got little children, then I got the boys and girls about to get married or just married, and then I had the fathers and mothers, and I had all these different classes, formed all by themselves. I never did anything about it. A mother would bring a child to see me, and I'd say, oh, let her join all the other kiddies and come and learn about the Sermon on the Mount. Why don't you join our mother and father's class? Well, there was nothing whatsoever to join. The only thing they joined was the spirit of each other. There was no organization, no name, no committee, nothing. no funds. What did you want funds for? To teach the Sermon on the Mount. So everything was so free and so easy and so perfect that nobody was in bondage to anything. They could go to their churches and children to their Sunday schools. It made no difference. This was just a little sort of sideline, shall we say. Well, now the children had to go take one verse, and then they had to go out through the week and watch carefully if they had an opportunity to live it. And then they had to come back next week. Now can you see the attraction? We didn't need any games and things to attract them to come and hear about Jesus, because Jesus himself was made attractive to them. And they brought more children and more children. They had to come back and tell us how they had been able to do it. Now sometimes a child would have just only one thing, where they'd been able to prove that they could do it. And I said, but that's marvelous, because all the week you were watching, weren't you? Well, most all the week, they'd say. But the adults very often said they hadn't watched at all. Children mostly did. But the parents would say, what on earth are you doing to my children? Why, they just seem to have an interest now, a different interest. For instance, I would get them, one time I'd say, now I'm going to show you how to trace God in this. Now this was once a tree, and God's life was in the tree. So we couldn't have had this unless God's life was everywhere present in the tree. So this is because of him we have this. Even the man who thought to carve and to make wood into beautiful things, he couldn't have done it without the life of God. So everything is because of God. So now, children, all this week I want you to go out and find some other things where you can only see God. Why, their mothers and fathers said it was really marvelous how they'd hunt. They'd hunt all day for things to try to find how God was in it. Well, you know, that's an excellent way to keep children out of mischief. An excellent way, and an occupation, because it was not only spiritual, but it was fun. It was a treasure hunt. I always remember the day a little boy came back to me and he said, I found God in my shirt. I said, you did? How? Tell all the class. Well, he said, see, it's made of cotton. And cotton comes off a plant. And God's life was in the cotton plant. So my shirt did come from him. And it used to be wonderful how they'd come back with all kinds of things. A little girl about her silk hair ribbon, the silkworm, all these things. They were so busy looking for God that we were having really interesting classes. Then came, as I say, the Sermon on the Mount. They knew now enough about God their Father, this glorious, wonderful Father. Now they wanted to learn how to love him. Now they wanted to know how to serve him. So we took the Sermon on the Mount and laid that little foundation first, how to find God, enough to make them love him, to search for him. Then each verse of the Sermon on the Mount, they had to go out and live. These two are interesting. The one was where we got to the verse, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of things about you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Well, we got to that, and they puzzled how you could rejoice. So this little girl, she was a little German girl, and the next week she looked very forlorn. And I said, have you got an answer to that verse? Did you have any opportunity? She said, I did. But it was awful, Gertrude. Just awful. Just about so high. Why? I said, what happened? Well, she said, you know, you told us that we were never, never, never to give each other away. That was cruel and unkind. Well, she said, you know, the teacher said to me the other day, you were talking. And I said, I wasn't. She said, because I knew that it was the girl sitting next to me that was talking, not me. But she didn't own up. And so the teacher said, it was you. It was not that child. It was nobody else. It was you. And she said, oh, dear, you said we mustn't give anybody away. And so I didn't. But I got the punishment. And I think that's awful, she said. Oh, I said, but you forgot the last part of the verse. Rejoice. and be exceeding glad. Why, I said, don't you feel glad you didn't give her away? Don't you feel glad, too, that you took that for his sake? Blessed are ye when men shall persecute you for my sake. It was for his sake, because you didn't give that child away. You weren't mean. You were honorable, weren't you? Don't you remember Jesus took the punishment? He took all that, too. Well, this is how she said it. Well, now just imagine. I didn't remember that best part. But I said, the next time you will. Oh, yes, she said. Now she would be watching for another opportunity to live it. Do you see how it was implanted into their consciousness that they were disappointed they failed? No longer was she bitter about what had happened, but she was disappointed she'd failed. Oh, this is a wonderful truth to instill into children's minds. Another little girl we'd had, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So it was her turn to give the first illustration. So I said, Erica, how did you get on? She said, 2 whole days I wasn't pure in heart. Oh, you would have loved that class of children. This room was just about this size that I had them in. It was packed, all sitting on the floor, just at my feet. I used to love them and love them. And this little girl said, I was 2 whole days not pure in heart. Well, I said, what did you do? She said, well, my daddy left my mommy for another woman. And my mommy cried and cried. And she said, I just hated that woman. And I was very cross with daddy. And then I wasn't pure in heart. I said, oh, then that meant you couldn't pray. Because I taught them never to pray if they had bitterness in their heart, because God couldn't hear. God wouldn't know anything about it, so they might just as well wait till peace came into their hearts. I said, so you couldn't pray for 2 whole days? No. Didn't you feel awfully lonely, Erica? Didn't you feel as if you were far, far from God? Yes, she said, I was miserable. They're so honest. What did you do then? She said, well, I remembered that my daddy loved God, but I just thought he must have forgotten about God. And I just thought perhaps that woman didn't know anything about God. So I just prayed, and I asked God to help Daddy to remember, and I asked him to let that woman get to love him. She said, was I pure in heart then, Gertrude? Oh, the joy of those children, that mastery of their little natures that they were disciplining so young. I had those children. Oh, there's one little boy, you must know about this. These stories don't bother you, I hope. Because these little stories to me just prove what children can do. This little boy had a sister about 5 years older than himself, who was delightful, but she used to tease him. And every time he was just about to get his blocks built up, she'd stroll by and kick them all over, just like children do. I can understand Elizabeth, and I could understand Jonathan. I knew I'd done that, and I'd been in that position too. So have we all. So one day he said to me, I can't turn the left cheek. I can't. So I said, you can't. They knew that turning the left cheek also meant don't retaliate. He said, no, because every time Elizabeth does it, I get so mad. And he went like this. So I said, yes, but now think of all the strength that came. You didn't get any strength till she kicked it over, did you? You were just kind of, well, just like this. But when she kicked that thing over, you got so full of strength. Where did it come from? He said, of course she made me mad. I said, yes, but it was strength. You could have knocked a bus over nearly then, couldn't you? Why, he said, I punched her hard. So I said, well, that's it, you see. She made a lot of strength come up into you, and then you used that strength to punch her back. Wasted strength. Wasted strength. All the opposition in this whole of nature is that things shall grow. The wind blows down that little sapling, but the sapling is non-resistant. It would be so foolish if it tried to battle against it, because it would break. So therefore the law of God is carried out perfectly in nature. Perfectly. The little sapling goes down, and it comes out, and it grows stronger with every time. Even if it becomes a wind-swept tree, it is said that the trunk of a wind-swept tree is so strong. And so I told this little boy this, and he said, well, what will I do with my strength? My strong, he said. It was just a little tiny chap. What will I do with my strong when it comes? I said, well, couldn't you think of some little thing to do with that strength? He said, who for? I said, Elizabeth. Something nice, he said. I said, something nice. You just think of something nice you can do with that strength, and then you'll watch Elizabeth and see how often she'll kick your blocks over after that. He said, you'll prove what Jesus said is right. Turn the left cheek also. About a week later, I met his mother, and she said, oh, Gertrude, you've no idea what that child did. She said, it melted me to tears. Elizabeth, as usual. She said, you know what a darling she is, but she does tease him so. And she just flipped his book up while he was reading it with his tummy on the floor, you know. She just came and flipped it up. And she said he got up just ready. And he said, but I won't. But I won't. I'm going to shine your shoes for you. And she said he went and got those shoes, and she said in all her life she never saw shoes that were shod like that. And he brushed and he brushed. The result was, she said, of course, that Elizabeth just burst into tears. And she said, oh, Jonathan, I'm sorry. And he said, oh, Gertrude will say it's been a good opportunity. And it was a good opportunity. And now since that little chap, he's going to always remember. Because as he gets older, he's going to get men oppose him, women oppose him, careers, everything will oppose him. His car won't start perhaps one morning when he's grown up. Everything will go wrong, just like Elizabeth made it go wrong. But he's got the key. He's got the foundation. He's got the foundation. So why I tell you this is that this Sermon on the Mount is the foundation. The very foundation to build the lives upon. But unless we know it, how will our children know it? And if we don't teach it, how will those children know it? Those few, 50 perhaps, will teach their children the way and show the way because they know the way. So you don't end up with 50. It goes out and out and out into thousands. Jesus took 12. And he trained those 12 completely in the disciplines of the Sermon on the Mount. And those 12, what have they done? The whole world is filled with what they did and what they taught. And you will notice that after Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount, he went out and lived it. He did all the things that he taught in that sermon. Hence, he not only left a message, but he left a life that nobody ever forgot. At least not those who love him. So what are we doing in this present age? We are trying to revive with all our efforts a foundation, a principle upon which we shall base our lives and the future of our children. And I have gone to peace conferences here. I have attended so many things, and it just breaks my heart. They sort of start from the third layer of bricks up, without a foundation. And if you speak too much about prayer, there's a kind of a shyness amongst the people. Prayer. Shy about prayer. Well, you're not shy to switch on there to get a light. Yet you wouldn't get your light if you didn't switch on. The powerhouse doesn't switch on for you. Because the powerhouse doesn't know when you want your lights on. And God has given us his power, his energy, his wisdom, his love, all around us, but chiefly within us. And to switch on is to turn within and talk with him, ask his guidance, seek his wisdom, read the Bible and ask, what does it mean, Lord? What does this mean? I want to know what this means. There's a verse in the Bible, the 2nd of Corinthians, 6th chapter, that I never really understood when I was young at all. I just couldn't. It says, this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world. And light reveals the darkness, so men do not like the light. But I can understand this is the condemnation. Light has come into the world. I prayed about that and prayed about it. Show me what it means, Lord. How can you connect condemnation with life? This is the condemnation. That light has come into the world. So therefore, the light within me reveals anything I do that is wrong, and there is my condemnation. The light within me reveals and condemns for me my own acts. And I couldn't understand it because later on it goes on to say, condemn not, lest ye be condemned. But you see, there is no condemnation except as the light within me reveals anything I might do that is wrong, and in that I am condemned. And that is the only condemnation. What grace! That the only condemnation that extends from our Father of love is His light within us, which condemns us when we do wrong, because it reveals it. Why, what love! That even His condemnation is love. Oh, it's a wonderful thing to know God in all His fullness, and to see the wonder of His love, His understanding, and the patience, and yet that God is within you, within me, as our moment-by-moment guide. If we don't tune in or turn into that power, naturally we shan't have it. We shall have that measure of impersonal blessing that is given to everybody, whether they are just or unjust. They all get fresh air to breathe. They all get the rain and sunshine. They all get the results of the harvest. They all have beauty around them. The beauty of this impersonal love of God does give all and sundry blessings. But for those who love Him as a personal, indwelling Lord, their blessings are multiplied 1,000 times. They are personal blessings. There is then a personal peace. There is then an acknowledgement and an understanding of perfect wisdom and peace and joy and all the things that are of the Spirit, whereas those who receive the impersonal blessings of God know nothing of indwelling peace, know nothing of indwelling joy, know nothing of a sense of utter security in God, because they haven't switched on. They haven't contacted this power. But to have that wonderful secret within, that I can have whatever I need when I need it. I shall know what to do when I have to do it. I shall know where to go when I have to go. Because of this indwelling guide that never leaves me nor forsakes me. Never. Now the awareness of that then only comes when we live from a foundation. If our foundation isn't firm, one day we shall be all right, the next day we should go down. One day we shall be a joy to our fellow creatures, and the next day we'll be a holy horror. We just cannot expect to be permanently and restfully the same as God says we can be, unless we are on a firm foundation. Therefore, the foundation, as I have discovered, is the Sermon on the Mount. So much so that when I left South Africa last August to come over here now for an indefinite time, probably all my life, that depends on God. Maybe not, but I don't mind. Whatever He wants is what I want. That they were even able to see that they could be happy in letting me go, because by letting me go they proved that they wanted me to take what I had to other children. Even my little grandchild said the same. Will the American children love what you say? Oh yes. Will they love you? I don't know. I expect so. Well, she said, if they do, you can stay, Gran. Meaning that it's only love that matters. I want you to have love. If you're not loved, well, you just come back and we'll love you. But there was quite a selflessness in that little thing. If they love you, you can stay. She knew that love was the most important thing in the world. But she perhaps hasn't altogether learned yet that you are always in love when you give out love. You're always in love. You know, I've often given this little explanation of the meaning of that to groups. We so glibly say she's in love with him or he's in love with her, but you know they are not until they are in love. They're just liking each other, fond of each other, affectionate towards each other, loving each other with a small L. But the moment they have become in love, walking in love, living in love, being in love with God, because God is love, so you've got to be in God to know what love is. Then if both of them are in love together, they are in love with each other. Real love comes from being in love with God. And so I used to teach that to the older ones. So the marriages have been a success. The young girls would say to me, aged perhaps from 18 to 25, oh, we had a funny evening one evening. I said, now let's start and go all around. Have any of you yet got a real boyfriend, a real one? No. No? Well, I said, now let's see what kind you like. So we'd start from here. I wanted to get their picture of what they wanted. This girl said, well, I'd like a tall, dark man with blue eyes. All right. Now, what would you like? Oh, I'd like a man who was interested in literature and music. He just had to know something about those things. What would you like? Oh, I'd like a man who always noticed how nice I looked. You know, some men never tell you how you look. Well, I'd like a man like that who always noticed the things I wore. And I said, all right, let's start with you three now. You might get your tall, dark man with blue eyes, but he may not be the character that you would like, nor would he perhaps be the type for you. So wouldn't it be better if you left the choice with God? Now, you would like a man who loves literature and loves music. I said he might be so involved in that you'd have a very dull time. It could be. Just like they say, never marry a stamp collector. That you wouldn't have any companion at all. I hope nobody here is married to a stamp collector. They say that's awful. I don't know, I never tried it. But in any case, this was the second one. And the third one. Oh, well, now, what was the one she wanted? Oh, she wanted a man who would love the things she wore and notice the things she had. I said, well, that might be nice. But you might get the type that says that to every woman. And then you might not like it. So now, wouldn't it be better if you just left all your choices out and said, I pray and give thanks that he who is mine by your choice is the one I want. Lead me to him and lead him to me. Now that means you've got to stop hunting. That means you've got to stop making eyes at everybody that looks like your pattern. Oh, we used to have fun. Could you picture it? We had a lot of fun. We turned it all into fun because it is fun. And you just have to not try to take one from some other girl because he looks like your pattern. You just have to just know the truth that you will be led to the one who is yours by divine right. Why, those girls have married so beautifully, so perfectly, have attracted just the right kind of men. I think there was one out of them who didn't want to get married. She is a careerist and she's done very well. But the others have, some of them certainly didn't get what they wanted. This one who wanted the tall, dark boy with blue eyes has got one who only reaches up to her shoulder. He's got very pretty eyes, sort of hazel brown. But he certainly isn't what she pictured. But he's a marvelous husband. We've had lots of laughs. You know, when the years go by and you go over the early lessons of the classes, could you picture what fun we had when I would remind them of what they thought they wanted? And so then we would tell the husbands too, you see, and on the quiet I'd say try and live up to it. It'd be awfully good if you could. And we'd had a lot of fun like that. We really did enjoy it. And then the mothers and fathers. The mothers and fathers, you see, learning the same thing in their class, they were able to see that their little children and young people were endeavoring to live that same principle. So that there was a beautiful kind of adjustment in their lives. For instance, one little girl who had been taught that the orange, being the whole orange, is representing God and all there is. Then you take the peel off and there's all the segments, and all the segments are whole and perfect. Break open each segment and you find the seed, and the seed is whole and perfect. And within that is the life that causes the whole orange tree. Therefore God is within the minutest part yet he is the fulfillment of all. He is both at the center and he is outwardly the same. So, I used to say, now this segment is you and this segment is you, and within you is this life of God functioning perfectly. But just look now, all my pieces have fallen apart. What are we going to do? This is like the nations. They're all whole parts of a whole body, but they have fallen away and they're not brothers. I said, imagine if your arm fell off or your leg fell off and you only had a part of something. You've got to be whole. Now, when you are apart like that, what does it mean? So one little boy said, that means we've had a bad quarrel, I suppose. I said, that's right, you've parted. You don't belong. You're not linked together. Well, he said, what will we do? Couldn't you put them all together? So I got all the segments and tried to put them together, but they fell over. Oh dear, I said, they've broken apart. What am I going to do? How are we ever going to get them all together? How shall we ever get you all together? This little chap screwed up his face. He said, wouldn't love put us all together? I said, yes, love would always bring you all together. So shall we call the appeal love? That God was in the little seed right at the center, and he was the love that held you all together. So that was the lesson they had on this. So this mother and father, at least the father, came to me one day. He said, what on earth have you been teaching my children about an orange? He said, the other night my wife and I were having quite a heated argument, and my little girl said, why, you two better put the peel on. So you see, although it sounded a strange way to talk, she's got the secret, hasn't she? Love must hold them together. So the parents learned from the children, and the children were learning from the parents. There's one more little story, and then I want you to ask some questions. I've really had some wonderful stories. I never know which one to tell. But this was a little girl who came to me. See, after class, those who had problems stayed behind, and all these little tots had their problems. Terrific. And this one little girl, sweet little thing, she came up to me and she said, I've got a dreadful problem. And I said, what have you done? Well, she said, I spilled a bottle of ink all over my new jersey that Mummy knitted. And you see, I wouldn't dare tell her because I'd get a whacking. I said, how long is it since you spilled the ink over? She said, 2 days. So I said, you've been miserable for 2 days? She said, yes, and I told some lies. I told her I'd lost it. And she said I had to look for it. And then I told her I couldn't because I don't know where it is. So that was 2 lies. You see how they watch? They watch how much they do wrong. And it's shocking for them once they've become aware of how they must live. So I said, well, Margaret, I just think this is just a bit stupid here. To me, this is just lack of common sense. She said, I don't know what to do. I said, oh, yes, you do. 2 whole days of that funny little pain under your heart. I don't suppose you slept very well either, and you haven't eaten and enjoyed your food. She said, oh, no. But I said, you know the remedy. You know what to do. Yes, I could go and tell her. I said, you could. But I'd get a whacking. I said, Margaret, now let's use our common sense. If you'd gone straight home that day and told your mummy about that jersey, and she'd given you the whacking, it would all be over by now, wouldn't it? And you wouldn't be sore because that wouldn't last too long. And now you've got the soreness in your heart for 2 whole days. I don't know which pain you'd rather have. I'd rather have the whacking. Yeah, she said, I suppose so. I'll still get the whacking. I said, you might still get the whacking, you might get a worse one. But you still won't have that awful pain in your heart when it's over. Can you see our children suffer inside? And so I said, I tell you what, Margaret, you go home and tell Mummy about it. And I will pray this little prayer. That Margaret's mummy remembers that once she was a little girl. That's the only prayer I will pray. She said, all right, I'll go home and tell her. I said, you must. If I'm going to pray that, you must. I will, she said. Just flung her little arms around my neck. And off she went, and I knew she would. 2 nights later, it was the mothers and fathers class. Margaret's mother and father were there. So she said to me after the meeting, you know you're smart, Gertrude. I said, what do you mean? Well, she said, I know all about the jersey with the ink now. But she said, you were very clever to say to Margaret, I will pray that her mummy will remember she was a little girl, and she was clever enough to tell me that. So, isn't that wonderful? So she didn't get the wetting. She said, you knew I couldn't answer that. Well, that's the fun we used to have. We used to apply common sense, and we used to be practical with the children, with the mothers and fathers. And so the whole families that I worked amongst grew up in this understanding. Yes, this is the marvel. Old and young, from that high up, and all ages, I gave the same lesson. That's interesting, isn't it? The same lesson. Going out to live the Sermon on the Mount and watch for opportunities. I think that I told you the children's stories in preference to those that were brought to me by the adults because, well, my heart is very much with children. It seems to me that the children are going to be this new generation. When I was in Iowa a week or two ago, I spoke to the high school there, to the students, the senior and junior students. And the principal said you won't have much attention from them. Some of them are just going all the wrong way, and I'm afraid landing soon in reformatories if they go on like this. So I'm very sad about some of the boys and girls in this school, which I've been told in Gary and other places. So he said, I don't know how you're going to get their attention. We've had speakers before, and they fidget and they move. I said, oh, well, you watch them and see. So I started off. They were all very fidgety, you know. You could feel they were saying, who is this mere woman? Why, I've thought that myself, too. I've thought all the things they all think. So somehow you understand them, and I watched them. Some were shy, and some were sort of giggling with each other. Wonder what she's got to say. There were about 350 of them, and they were sitting like this way up in the sort of gallery, and I was down here. So I said, well, this is the first time in my life that I've ever had to look up to children. I bet they laughed. And I said, you know another thing? I have over, well, I would say 350 sons and daughters, and I have well over 1,500 grandchildren. That's rather a lot, don't you think? Why, they shrieked with laughter, you see. I said, yes, just imagine. Do you know anybody who's got so many? Oh, they didn't know. So I said, and now the tragedy is I've got 350 more. They all became my children in that second. And then I talked to them and showed them how to build pictures in their mind. Beautiful pictures. I had one or two of them tell me what they wanted to be, and I said, you often build this picture into your mind? Oh, yes. You're determined to hold fast to it and see that it comes about? Yes. You're positive it will come about? Yes. I said, so will the pictures that you others hold that are not beautiful ones. Because if an architect plans his house and he isn't careful and he doesn't study different things, he will find when his house is up, he's got the sun porch the wrong side. He's got his kitchen at the wrong angle. And it's a much harder job to change that house than it would have been had he changed the plan in his mind. So I was just wondering, how many of you have pictures that are not good? How many? Lots of hands went up. Oh, I said, don't let them happen. I said, you know, that's why boys and girls sometimes get in reformatory schools. They shouldn't, really. They're nice boys and girls. But in some strange way, there was nobody to guide them about the kind of pictures to build. And I said, I just hope that some of my pictures are going to help you. So I gave them all kinds of pictures to have in their mind and gave them a long talk. And then it's about an hour, and I said, now I've come over to America to put my soul into the soul of America because I believe that America must become the spiritual leader of the world. And although at the moment she isn't because the world isn't looking up to her, and yet it is in the shaping. And if you boys and girls will carry on and build this picture of God at the center of all your pictures, God at the center of education, God at the center of everything, you will make this country a beautiful spiritual country. A beautiful spiritual country. And I've brought my soul to put into the soul of America. How many of you will put your soul in with me? You never heard such a roar of applause. I have never, in any place I've ever been, had such a reception. They stamped, they clapped, they shouted, their hands went up. The principal was just about moved to tears. And he said to me, I'll just have to give the morning over to you. So he put up his hand to stop them, and he said, all right. He said, now, you shan't have any work this morning. We'll just put this whole morning over for you all to ask questions. And they did till noon. It was one of the grandest experiences I've had in the United States, of getting their mind by showing them the good, and then giving them a start of how to do it. That's what I want, the message I want to leave with you.